Hello, I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me today is Tina Eliassi-Rod, Professor of Computer Science at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Good morning, Tina.
Thank you.
How are you doing this morning?
Excellent.
I know that on your bio it says that you focus on cyber situational awareness. What is that?
Right. So cyber situational awareness is about perception and understanding of what's happening in cyberspace or in a particular cyber domain like Rutgers.edu.
Okay.
And if you have a complete and accurate and timely cyber situational awareness system, then decision makers can make appropriate decisions about both offensive and defensive actions to do to protect their network, to protect Rutgers.edu, to improve performance. And and my work especially has been on looking at cyberspace as a collection of interacting networks, of social networks of machines, communication networks of machines, how they interact and how it interacts with the underlying physical network. And so let me give you a problem. So one concrete example is you want to know what kind of traffic is going on in your cyber domain, whether the majority of your traffic is web traffic or whether it's file sharing traffic and so on and so forth. And this is a hard problem because an adversary can fake what kind of traffic they're sending or receiving. And in fact, one of the attacks is called polymorphic blending, where I fake it that I am doing web traffic, like I'm accessing Google, but I'm actually sending out information that I shouldn't be sending out from whatever location I'm in. And so we look at this with respect to a social network of machines and do what we call profiling by association or guilt by association to figure out like what percentage of traffic on your network is web or peer-to-peer file sharing or something else.
All right, let's take a step back because you
okay.
just said a whole bunch, and
Right.
I want to go back and make sure I understand it. So the first thing you said there was the offensive and the defensive.
Yeah, yeah.
All I think of is football at that particular point. So
Yeah,
can you
it
give
is.
me a context in terms of what that
It
means
is.
for you?
So by being aware of what's happening on your cyberspace, for example, you can include more bandwidth for certain parts of your domain, or for example, you can say, I'm not going to allow people to communicate on this port or this highway, if you want to call it, because they're slowing down the entire system.
Okay.
So a lot of the defensive actions are more preventative, right? Like I'm going to install this kind of security software, or I'm not going to permit this kind of traffic on my machine, or you have to secure the kind of traffic that you're sending. You can't send something unsecured. And then there's offensive, which is more, terms that you've heard maybe about, like cyber war, where you actually go and try to attack some other machine or some other domain. In fact, one of the things that has been very interesting recently has been that real wars have preceded, cyber wars happen before real wars.
Okay.
So in Estonia, for example, they had a skirmish with Russia, and a lot of the government sites got attacked with denial of service attacks. So. So usually you're seeing these kinds of things. So it's basically just being aware of what's happening in your house in some sense, right?
So let's talk about that for a second, because those of us who are computer savvy but aren't behind the computer savvy in some context, how do you begin to study that, or how do you begin to look at some of those things?
So a lot of it has to do with collecting data. So you collect the kind of network traces that are happening on your network. You collect data about what's happening on your machine with respect to the processes, like how much memory your machine is spending. And so a lot of it has to do with collecting data. It's kind of like if you want to protect your house, you put sensors right around it to measure what's happening. And it's similar to that, where you, in some sense, are putting sensors on cyber domain or on cyberspace and measuring what's happening. And then you do data mining on it, which is basically trying to figure out patterns and anomalies in this data.
I know one of the things you do a great deal of research on and teaching on is the idea of social networking.
Right.
And the conversation around connectivity. So can you
Right.
talk a little bit about that? I know you're teaching a special topics class this semester.
Right, right. So especially after, so there's several new fields that have really flourished these days, and it's a combination of having the technology now, the information technology with computers, and also after 9/11, people got really excited about connectivity of, oh, if we could have only connected the dots. And so
Right.
that also propped up fields like network science, which is an interdisciplinary network of studying physical phenomena, social phenomena with respect to networks and trying to build predictive models of them. So for example, by studying who's connected to whom and who has certain preferences, you could see whether you should go to a demonstration tomorrow or whether you should not go to a demonstration tomorrow, whether there will be a critical mass of people there or whether you would better stay home and not,
Right.
and not get arrested, for example. You know, you could study who should you friend based on the connectivities that you have. There has been excellent work done on people who fill particular positions in these social networks where they fill quote-unquote structural holes. They are like brokers. Good things come to them, like wealth and power and bonuses. And so you can think about if you're in an organization where you fit within the social network and whether you can be one of those brokers, because historically really good things come to them.
Well, how does one become a broker? Like, it's the first time I had ever heard that
Right.
kind of conversation.
So usually these brokers are people who connect different parts of the social network together. So for example, I connect my Rutgers social network with my previous position, which was I was a staff scientist at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. So I can pass information from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory to my colleagues at Rutgers.
Oh, wow.
And so because I get exposed to different kinds of information and because I am this gateway, this broker of passing on information, I can, for example, either sit in on a juicy bit of information and pass it along after, you know, its worth has diminished, or I can pass it along when it's very worthy and people can take advantage of it.
So the idea of information access and gatekeeping is really important to the broker.
It's very important to the broker, yeah, very important. And the other thing is that usually brokers, because they come into contact with different types of people, they can so for example, if you have a broker that talks to computer scientists and they talk to humanists and they talk to social scientists, they develop this vocabulary of how to communicate with different types of people.
Okay.
And that is extremely important, for example, in organizations. Exactly, exactly. And that's, so we don't know if there's a causal relationship, but there's a strong correlation with respect to people who fill these holes. And this is actually a work by Professor Ron Burt at University of Chicago, who has done some excellent both empirical and theoretical work on this.
Okay.
But basically, so for example, we study, you know, your position in a social network. How can you change your position? How many of your friends know each other?
Well, let's go to that, because I know that there was a report published recently that Facebook says there were only 4.7 people away from being connected to each other. So how does a scientist begin to study that? I mean, how do we, because there was this complex map and I kind of looked at it and I kind of just was in awe of it.
So this kind of study of degrees of separation actually goes back to 1929. This Hungarian author, Corinthi, wrote a small story called Chains, or in translation it's called Chains, where in his story two people were separated at most by 6 friendship links. And then back in the 1960s, in 1967, there was a social psychologist, Stanley Milgram, who published a seminal paper called The Small World Phenomenon. And he coined this phrase, 6 degrees of separation, that we use all the time, or, oh, it's a small world. And he did some really excellent empirical studies of passing on a postcard from Nebraska from a bunch of people in Nebraska to a particular person in Boston. And he saw that it passes hands 6 times.
Right.
So there's 5 intermediaries between the sender and the receiver. So, but both in Stanley Milgram's case and in the recent studies of how far people are, there's a strong bias with respect to who you sample, right? Who your social network is. So if you take the Facebook example, they took data from May of 2011, and they included people who were "quote unquote" active in that month. And so you're not looking at people who are not on Facebook. You're not looking at people who, for some reason, were not active during that time. And also on Facebook, the notion of friend is very loose, right? So you can have like 600 friends or 800 friends. And some recent work by a British anthropologist, Robin Dunbar, has shown that as humans, our processing capabilities for our neocortex is such that we can only really have stable social relationships with about 150 people, where you know what's going on. And so there's a lot of biases that goes on, but for that particular study on Facebook, basically what it showed is that Facebook is good at connecting people to each other.
Let's talk a little bit about that. In the short time that we have left, let's talk about how Facebook was really important and tweeting was really important to the Arab Spring this past year.
Right. Right. So one of the things that dictators rely on is this idea of pluralistic ignorance, that a lot of people, they underestimate how many other people are unhappy.
Right.
And so what Facebook and Twitter has allowed people to do is to spread their message very quickly that, oh, we are also unhappy. And this is actually interesting because so during the Iranian Revolution of 1979, people were passing on information through cassettes.
Okay.
And then during the Tiananmen Square, it was fax machines. And now we're at the speed of communication that we are now. And so people can post videos and obviously you'll be sympathetic to somebody who's being beaten by police in Cairo, and you would get all hot and bothered and go to a particular demonstration. So people find out that a lot of other people are unhappy, and people find out that, let's say, the majority of my friends are going to the demonstration, so it will make me feel better about going to the demonstration, that there's going to be a critical mass, that it will really damage the government. So it's just a really good way of passing on information to a majority of people, where dictators don't like that, right? They want to pass only their own message.
Well, we're winding down, so what I want to do is I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for the insight. I learned a whole bunch new that I had not known before, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks very much. That's all we have time for. Thanks for coming. We'll talk to you soon, and we'll be back soon. Joining me is Tom Ferris, Dean of the School of Engineering at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
I found your background fascinating, so why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and how you came to Rutgers?
I'm from a very small town in Texas. Did my undergraduate degree at Rice University in mechanical engineering, where I met the love of my life, a chemical engineer. And we learned about the dual career opportunity early on, and ended up in Chicago, where she had a nice job, and I did my graduate work at Northwestern.
Okay.
After studying applied mechanics at Northwestern, I went to Purdue University, where I was on the faculty of aeronautics and astronautics in the College of Engineering, last 11 as head of that school. We had a great run in the School of Aero and saw the enrollment increase. Were able to increase the faculty, saw the research funding increase, and then built a new building, the Neil Armstrong Hall of Engineering, named for a Purdue alum that you may know something about. And after 11 years as being head of that school, I was interested in doing something else, and the phone rang, and it was Rutgers, and I'm very pleased to be here at Rutgers.
Good. I know some of your research in the past has been on metal fatigue, and you've worked with unique kind of team. Can you talk a little bit about that?
In addition to doing applied mechanics, I also did work in tribology. Tribology comes from the Greek word tribos, which is rubbing.
Okay.
So tribology is all about the study of friction and wear. And in particular, I was doing fretting fatigue. Fretting fatigue is a special sort of fatigue. Fatigue is any time that materials fail under cyclic loading when they wouldn't fail under uniform loading.
Okay, what's cyclic loading and
So,
what's uniform?
so cyclic loading means that the load is varying in time.
All right.
So if you think about, for instance, the wheel on your car, each time the wheel revolves, the loads on all of the components in the car cycle.
Okay.
So, and over time, millions literally of these cycles can accumulate. And then fretting fatigue is a particular type of fatigue associated with structural joints.
All right.
Where, and by joints, the bodies are nominally clamped together, but because of the vibration, there's some small scale sliding, particularly at the edges of contact.
So when you were working with metal fatigue, were you working with the military? Were you working with private industry? How?
So for the last 10 years, actually starting in about 1996, I was on a program first funded by the U.S. Air Force and then funded by DARPA,
okay.
Which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, in an area called high cycle fatigue. High cycle fatigue is when, of course, cycles can accumulate very, very rapidly. The particular application was in aircraft engines.
All right.
Especially military aircraft engines, as the requirements on the engines increased over time and the engines had to spin faster and become lighter, the Air Force started noticing some issues associated with high cycle fatigue.
Okay.
There are a couple of different classes. One is from foreign object damage, which is if, say, a small pebble on the runway, etc., actually is ingested into the engine and does some damage.
Okay.
There can be a fatigue associated with that. The particular area I was looking at was in what's referred to as attachment fatigue. If you look at the details of an aircraft engine, there are discs which cycle, right. And there are airfoils, think of small wings, attached to these discs.
Okay.
Now the attachment to the disc is not by welding or screws or anything, it's only by friction. And there are special shapes, sometimes referred to as dovetails,
all right.
Mimicking the tail of a dove or a fir tree, multiple tanks. And as the engine spools up, the blade actually slides out on the attachment. Okay, and if there's some unsteady aerodynamics, or if the pilot does a maneuver to adjust speeds and so on, there can be, again, issues at the edges of the contact within the attachments. So I was on a team that the Air Force put together with university researchers and with researchers from the three aircraft engine manufacturers in this country, okay. Namely GE, General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, which is part of the United Technologies Corporation in Connecticut, and Rolls-Royce, which had acquired the engine manufacturer in Indianapolis. Okay. And so I was actually assigned to be the leader of this team. And what we did was develop a tool. We did some experiments in the laboratory where we were able to reproduce some of the important features of these failures in the laboratory under very controlled conditions. And then we developed computational tools to be able to predict when the failures would occur. And then the engine manufacturers took these computational tools and used them in the design and repair of components going forward.
Now, are you still doing that research, or are you doing new research now that you're here at Rutgers?
So there's a level at which I've declared victory on that problem and turned that tool over to the engine manufacturers. Here at Rutgers, doing some work with a small project from the National Science Foundation and still collaborators back at Purdue on nanostructured materials and the performance of those materials, especially their surfaces.
So what's a nanostructure material?
So nano,
Meaningful.
nano is some jargon which is out there in the community more now. Nano means 10 to the minus ninth.
Okay.
So a nanometer is 10 to the minus ninth meters. Okay. So much smaller, for instance, than the width of your human hair. Okay.
Right.
And so nanostructured materials are materials in which the grain structure, the actual small-scale structure of it, is designed to be at very small scales, for instance, on the nanometer scale.
Wow. I'm just trying to imagine, how do you even begin to work with something that small?
So again, the nanostructured structures within the materials are that small, but again, the bulk material can still be scales that we can do experiments with in the laboratory, and also do computations associated with the modeling of the performance of those materials.
Let's talk a little bit about your position as dean. You came here in 2009, and you've been with the school now a little over 2 years. So talk to me about your vision for the school and kind of what you want to be able to accomplish as dean.
What was really exciting about the opportunity to come to Rutgers to be Dean of the School of Engineering is that when Rutgers does its benchmarking with its AAU aspirational peers, schools like the University of Michigan, UCLA, University of Washington, University of Texas, University of Virginia, schools we would like to be like, their schools of engineering are all much bigger than the Rutgers. And when I say much bigger, one of the metrics that we use to measure size would be the number of faculty.
All right.
So when I arrived, Rutgers had 132 faculty in engineering. All of these other schools have more than 200 faculty in the School of Engineering, okay, or in some cases even more than 300 faculty in the School of Engineering. It's also, as everyone knows, one of the great things about Jersey is Jersey has great high schools.
We do.
So there are many students that would like to have the opportunity to study engineering, so the enrollment within the school could be bigger, and so that provides an opportunity for us to grow the size of the faculty. And so to be part of or leading the school at a time when the university actually wants it to grow is a really exciting opportunity. So when I came, we had about 132 faculty, and this fall we have 141 faculty.
Oh, wow.
So we've been able to grow some. We've also seen some growth in the enrollment. In the fall of 2009, when I arrived, there were about 2,700 undergraduates.
Right.
And this fall, there's about 3,200 undergraduates.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things that's really exciting about that is even while we're seeing some growth in the undergraduate student body, the profile of the students is also improving. So as an example, the SAT scores of the entering class this year is 36 points higher than it was last year.
That's great.
And last year, the average SAT score actually put us in the top 10 amongst public engineering schools. So we have a great student body. We also have a very diverse student body. The number of women in the entering class, 136, is twice as many as there were 5 years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about your vision around kind of research and grants for the school. Kind of what are you hoping to accomplish with your faculty?
So another part of coming to Rutgers that's really quite exciting is we have some really successful mid-career faculty. And when I say really successful, they're very competitive in the federal research grant game. So these are peer-reviewed projects, and so getting the projects themselves actually adds to our stature, and a lot of very nice interaction with industry. So as one example, Rutgers has an ERC funded by the National Science Foundation.
What's an ERC?
ERC is Engineering Research Center.
Okay.
It's the most prestigious funding that NSF gives in engineering.
Oh, wow.
At any one time, there are about 16 ERCs around the country. The Rutgers ERC is in the area of pharmaceutical manufacturing.
Okay.
So it's all around process and product design associated with pharmaceuticals. It's a base grant from the National Science Foundation of $4 million per year. and there are about 35 companies that partner with the center. So in the companies, and of course in New Jersey, include large pharma,
right.
Equipment manufacturers, sensor manufacturers. And so when you add the federal funding and the partnerships with the companies, this is the largest pharmaceutical manufacturing research center in the world. Really exciting.
Which probably gets me into my next question, because I know you wanted to also, as dean, partner a lot more with the state of New Jersey and be really influential in terms of kind of partnering with the corporations in New Jersey and the other areas in New Jersey.
And let me talk about a couple of other research projects.
Okay.
We have the CATE, which is the Center for Advanced Infrastructure and Transportation.
Right.
Of course, New Jersey is a transportation hub. Lots of bridges associated with New Jersey.
Yep.
And CATE has a nice project from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, around repair and inspection of bridges.
Okay.
So developing robots for automated inspection and repair of these bridges.
Wow.
And of course, lots of construction companies in New Jersey, lots of companies associated with transportation.
Absolutely.
We also have a very nice research center associated with the Wireless Information Network, WinLab.
Okay.
My predecessors at Rutgers had the vision to establish the Wireless Information Network Laboratory more than 20 years ago.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Of course, for our new students, they don't realize that there was a time when there wasn't a wireless information network. But again, the WinLab involves all of the communication companies in New Jersey, and it has a very nice funding from the National Science Foundation, again, associated with examining future internet architectures.
Oh, wow, very cool. At this particular point, my producer's telling me that we're near the end, so I want to thank you for being here. Good luck with Dean. I think you're doing some amazing things. You have some amazing faculty, and good luck with your time here at Rutgers. And hopefully we'll have you back on again to talk more about your research and your research centers.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
A lot of fun.
Well, that's all we have for this time in the edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. For more information about any of the subjects we've discussed here today, please visit our website at rutgers.tv. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies, I'm Bill Leipold, and thanks for watching.